Russia is a giant. It spans over 6.3 million square miles, 11 time zones, and more than 190 ethnic groups. But in this vast patchwork of cultures, unity has never been its strongest suit. Now, rising unrest has some analysts warning that Russia might not survive the next few decades in one piece. Today on the Infographics Show, we're looking at why Russia might actually break apart. If you've ever traveled across Russia, you'll know it doesn't feel like one country. It's more like a loose collection of countries awkwardly stitched together under one flag. The glitzy streets of Moscow, with its luxury boutiques and rooftop clubs, feel like a different planet compared to the rural Dagestan or the snowbound Buryatia. In many of these regions, people don't see themselves as part of Mother Russia. Their loyalty lies within their ethnicity, their religion, and their region. Russia is a sprawling patchwork of 83 federal subjects, at least 21 of which are republics with their own ethnic majority and often their own official language. Those are proud cultural strongholds, many with centuries of defying Moscow's steel-toe capped boot. Moscow might be the brain of Russia, running science, tech, the economy, and the military, but it doesn't always control the heart. Since the Ukraine war and crushing sanctions, old resentments in the regions have deepened. Unsurprisingly, sending men to the battlefront as so-called cannon fodder from regions where you once or twice committed war crimes hasn't gone down very well with a lot of people. Take Chechnya, one of the black sheep of the Russian Federation family. It's legally part of Russia, but it's not exactly a friendly relationship. Conflict with the central government stretches back centuries, from the days of the Russian Empire to brutal suppression under Stalin to all-out war in the 1990s and insurgency in the 2000s. Chechnya tasted independence in the chaos following the 1917 Russian Revolution, only to be quickly reabsorbed into the new Soviet Union when Lenin decided to start crushing dissent. Then, in the 1940s, Stalin accused the Chechens of collaborating with Nazi Germany, responding with mass deportations and ethnic cleansing. Entire families were loaded up into cattle cars and dumped into Siberia and Central Asia. Fast forward to 1991. With the Soviet Union collapsing, Chechnya once again declared independence. But by 1994, the Russian military moved in, and the First Chechen War was brutal. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed, 500,000 displaced, and much of the capital, Grozny, was reduced to smoking rubble. Humanitarian organizations accused Russian forces of systematic war crimes, bombing, looting, torture, and targeting civilians. Then came the Second Chechen War, which was arguably even worse. Today in Chechnya, you'll hear a lot of talk about reconciliation and happy families. But scratch beneath the surface, and there are fires of resentment burning that could explode at any moment. Of course, Putin himself installed a loyal strongman in Chechnya to keep things in line. Ramzan Kadyrov, son of the assassinated pro-Kremlin Chechen leader Akhmat Kadyrov. Ramzan now rules Chechnya like his personal fiefdom. He is a ruthless enforcer of Putinism. But if Putin were to go, it's doubtful he would last long. And Chechnya isn't the only part of the Russian Federation with old scores to settle. The fact is, when a country grows as large as an empire, it inevitably inherits the problems of an empire: discontent, division, and demands for autonomy. You can rule with an iron fist and pay out bribes to pliable elites, but it all tends to catch up with you in the end. Just ask any former empire how hard it is to maintain even a semblance of cohesion. And then there's Tatarstan, a wealthy republic in the Volga region. Unlike Chechnya, it's not scarred by war and human rights abuses, but that doesn't mean, given the chance, it might spread its wings that Russia once clipped. During the Soviet era, Tatar culture was systematically repressed, the Tatar language was sidelined, and efforts to Russify the population created a lot of resentment. Many citizens felt like their identity was being scrubbed out, whitewashed in the name of Soviet unity. That resentment gave rise to political activism, and for a time it looked like Tatarstan might go its own way. But the movement kinda stalled when Putin came to power, and Moscow began tightening its grip. He did what any leader of a powerful state might do: consolidate control, neutralize dissent, and centralize power. But as one academic put it, this left a bitter taste in the mouth of many Tatars. Quite a lot of them don't see themselves as part of the Russian cultural sphere at all. Some feel closer to Central Asia or Turkey than to ethnic Russians or Moscow or St. Petersburg. And then there's Dagestan, a place where it feels like half the young men are training for the octagon before they can even drive. It's not just a sport, it's identity. Wrestling and fighting are woven into the culture. And while they might be ready to throw down in the ring, these men are just as fierce about protecting their families, honoring their community, and living by their faith, especially Islam. These are all radically different regions shaped by mountains, language, and a complex history, and many of the people living in them feel about as connected to Moscow as they do to Mars. Same goes for many of the indigenous peoples of Siberia, in places like Tuva, Buryatia, and Yakutia. Many of them don't identify as Russian at all, and yet, when war broke out in Ukraine, they were very much considered Russian enough to be drafted to the front lines. Suddenly, young men from these cold, remote republics found themselves in a fight that some of them barely understood. They were sacrificed for a government they never voted for, led by elites they had never seen, and felt a little bit like cannon fodder. Many of them resented it, especially since the sons of Moscow and St. Petersburg's wealthy neighborhoods seemed conveniently absent from the front lines. So it's not surprising that protests broke out about the war all over the Russian Federation. In 2022, as mobilization orders were handed out, civilians and local police clashed in places like Chechnya, Dagestan, and other parts of the North Caucasus. And in any war, there will be protests. That's universal, whether you're in Moscow, Minnesota, or Myanmar. But this wasn't just a country protesting a war. This was a vast patchwork of regions with centuries of historical grievances. If Vladimir Putin wanted to break the proverbial camel's back, then shipping off those young men to Ukraine was a very meaningful straw. These people are feeling picked on by a country that has a long history of picking on them. 81% of the Russian Federation is ethnically Russian, so Russians are living among other ethnicities, but that doesn't mean they're all loyal to Moscow. Like most humans, in times of tension, they might take a path of least resistance and do what's good for them and their family. Let's now see how things could crack apart. For many years, the Siberians have mulled a Siberian republic. Siberia makes up around 77% of Russia's landmass, but only about a quarter of its population. Sure, there's a whole bunch of empty space out there, but that space just so happens to be home to some very valuable oil and gas reserves. But despite producing a vast majority of Russia's oil and gas, Siberia and the Far East receive a disproportionately small share of the economic wealth. Around 70% of Russia's GDP comes from European Russia, where almost all the investment and infrastructure is poured. And when you follow the money, it's even starker. About 71% of that GDP is spent on a small European slice of the country compared to the absolutely massive Asian part. So you've got this huge landmass with all the goodies but none of the goodness. For the political bigwigs in Moscow, the thought of an independent Siberia is a nightmare that leaves them waking up in cold sweats. That's why they banned Siberian independence marches there in 2014, accusing the protesters of, quote, calls to mass unrest, extremist activities, or participation in illegal public events. Moscow threatened the media and blocked social media while partly blaming foreign interference. Truth be told, foreign governments might indeed have stirred things up. Russia has too many natural resources, and that makes other powers nervous. Condoleezza Rice, the former U.S. Secretary of State, once said, "Siberia is too big. It should not belong to one single state." Those words were echoed by Madeleine Albright, the former U.S. Secretary of State, who apparently said, "Where is justice if only one country owns land like Siberia?" But both women deny making such remarks. Russian troll farms likely spread both comments. What matters is that Russia would like people to think this, knowing that the US would dearly want Siberia out of Russia's iron grip. The reason they would want that is, 1. It would weaken Russia in the unstoppable game of global power politics, and 2. The US and its European allies could wrangle some deals with Siberia for gas and oil. So an independent Siberia is a Western politician's dream. Right now, Siberia doesn't have the will, and we mean amongst most of the populace, to get into a fight with Moscow. It certainly doesn't have the firepower, and so it would probably mean Western nations would have to get involved, and therein lies the problem. There would have to be a lot of propaganda. The West would have to paint it as in the interests of all mankind to free Siberia from Moscow's grip. But that's a hard sell in a world already very weary and cynical of foreign interventions. Let's say Russia loses the war, or more likely just bleeds out slowly in a drawn-out mess. Sure, odds aren't great of that happening, but let's run with it. Then Putin gets pushed out, and suddenly there's political chaos, a Russian specialty. Corruption skyrockets, the economy takes a nosedive, and nobody seems to be in charge. Out in Siberia, governors and elites are fed up. They start talking about independence, about self-rule, about how we send our gas west and get nothing back. Then they take control of their budgets. They draft statements, they even draft flags. They're so sick of the abuse, and they know very well they can survive, even flourish as an independent entity. All they need is a little push, and there's never a shortage of Western powers eager to land a kick right where it hurts Moscow the most. And just like that, the map starts redrawing itself. Western energy companies would be chomping at the bit. They would be lining up to strike deals with freshly minted Siberian oligarchs for natural gas reserves, conveniently delivered through newly proposed pipelines. They would also be eyeing coal, timber, and metal, all in the name of the greater good of mankind, of course. So when a Siberian Congress suddenly forms and votes for economic autonomy, it's game on. Within days, the new Siberian Federal Republic is declared and the West is all in. Billionaire newspapers gush about a bold democratic shift. Think tanks start cranking out white papers, and Washington and Brussels are already flying in their advisors. Russia could try to send in troops, round up the Siberian political elites, and put the whole thing down in a puddle of Siberian blood. But given that the Western media would call an attack a threat to global energy security and mankind's future, Russia would be hesitant. Anyway, there would be a political vacuum going on, and then sanction threats would all be laid down. UN emergency meetings are held. But here is the awkward bit. Russia has nukes. If Russia is spiraling into chaos, and if European Russia is offered a soft landing or at least new trade deals, then maybe the nukes stay in their bunkers. That's where a new Russian leader comes in, a media-trained puppet and a little pliable, a man who's got the backs of the Russian oligarchs. This is a man the West can do business with, just as President George W. Bush once said about Putin. Sure, it's going to cause a lot of misery and poverty among the regular folks of European Russia, but that's never been a problem for Russian oligarchs or Western politicians. Okay, sure, we've moved a lot of pieces around the board. But if history teaches us anything, it's that global power politics can flip overnight. Wars, assassinations, coups, sanctions. It doesn't take long for the entire game to change. The big issue is that Siberia doesn't really have a strong separatist movement at the moment. Not yet. Most of the population is still Russian, and regional elites wouldn't want to risk it all unless the Kremlin looked well and truly cooked. But overturn the right cards in order: war fatigue, economic collapse, leadership vacuum, corruption, propaganda bonanza, and the cracks might start to show. Oh, but what about China? It certainly knows what it's like to be kicked when you're down after its brutal century of humiliation. China is living proof that a country can be sliced and diced and roughed up when global powers gang up on another great power. And guess who did some of that kicking when China was down on its knees? Russia. In global power politics, unconditional friendships do not exist. The other giant slab of Russia is the Far Eastern Republic, a resource-rich expanse home to around 3.5 million people. About 1.6 million are ethnic Russians. The rest is a mix of indigenous groups and families with roots in China, Japan, Mongolia, and Korea. These people live closer to Tokyo, Seoul, and Beijing than they do Moscow, and many feel more affinity to their Asian neighbors than they do for the suits who rule from Moscow. And the Far Eastern Republic's trade already leans very east. Just like Siberia or the Caucasus, these regions often feel more like economic colonies than proud cultural partners of Moscow. And let's say the pieces on the board haven't changed since Siberia hypothetically pulled out the giant scissors and cut ties to European Russia. China, the other regional hegemon, could see an opportunity in a fractured Russia. Just like the West, it has its interests. And it has cash, muscle, and zero scruples about cutting deals in the gray zones of geopolitics. So as Russia fumbles, China quietly joins the party. It starts offering the usual things it does when it wants to own the future: infrastructure, money, and promises. It proposes new pipelines to funnel gas and oil. It wants timbers, materials, and access to the ports and the rail lines that will open up the region. It promises prosperity like the Far East has never seen. Not to be left out, Japan and South Korea, with backing from the West, throw their hats in too. Everyone loves a reconstruction project, especially one that's good for mankind. The oligarchs back in Moscow are still being looked after. That new leader, the one with the puppet strings, just barely visible every time he appears on TV talking about unity and prosperity for all, it's been done before. The Russian people know what it's like to be promised gold and given vodka, bread queues, and generous helpings of despair. Unlike Siberia, though, the Far East might not need much convincing to make the cut. The indigenous groups and non-Russian minorities of the region have quietly resisted Moscow's domination for a long time. Groups like the Yakuts or the Buryats don't need a crash course in Russian imperialism. They have lived it. For them, independence means no more wars, no more conscription, no more sons sent to die in Ukraine for a country that doesn't even acknowledge their language in schools. So if Siberia goes, the Far East will go much more easily. Within months, geopolitics experts will start calling it the domino effect. Now let's talk about the parts of Russia that won't need any propaganda at all to show up at the breakup party: the North Caucasus. As we said earlier, Chechnya, Dagestan, Ingushetia, Adygea and the rest of the republics in the region are culturally distinct, religiously different from Moscow, and historically hostile toward Moscow's rule. They have fought wars, buried generations, and still carry the scars. This divorce has been in the cards a long time. For the North Caucasus, the chance to kick Moscow to the curb would not be a debate, it would be a celebration. All they need is the green light and a bit of backing. Of course, all the puppet leaders propped up by the Kremlin would have to go, and with that, independence would be sewn up. The problem? Stability. These regions don't have the economic clout of Siberia or the Far Eastern Republic. What they do have is a vast tangle of unaligned ethnic groups, historical grudges, and religious factions. With this power vacuum, the warlords of the region might start getting testy. Some breakaway states might curtail human rights, freedom of expression, and civil society. It would be messy, ugly, but also very profitable, at least for the global war economy, because there'll be plenty of interventions for the next 20 years. Western powers will get busy building stability as they make an impression on the region with their corporations. But what if the Western leaders pushed for a Caucasian federation with some kind of defined political center? Europe would invest, offer loans, and pitch economic miracles. Give it some time, and it could work. Last but not least, the Volga-Urals will pitch for independence. This is a cluster of 6 republics: Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Chuvashia, Mariel, Mordovia, and Udmurtia. Together, they could form the Volga-Ural Republic. Tatarstan, as we've mentioned, already has issues with Moscow. It's a major oil producer and home to a proud Turkic Muslim identity. Bashkortostan, too, is rich in energy and culturally distinct. It wouldn't take much nudging to convince these republics to jump on the breakup train. They share more cultural and linguistic ties with Turkey, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan than they do with Moscow. And you can bet those nations would lend their support. Not out of kindness, of course. Like the US and its allies, like China, Japan, and Korea, they would demand a slice of the Russian pie. Still, a single, united Volga-Ural Republic would fare far better than fragmented mini-states, so that's our 5th new country. And it would be economically viable, culturally coherent, and backed by powerful friends. But what's going to happen to European Russia? As we said, the oligarchs will do just fine. They always do. Unfortunately, the ordinary citizens will not do well once European Russia is gutted. Most of Russia's oil, gas, coal, and mineral wealth? Gone. Snapped up by Siberia, the Far East, and the Volga-Ural region. Suddenly, the Kremlin's vault is empty, inequality is through the roof, and the oligarchs are fleeing, and Moscow is running on fumes. What is left is a shrunken core with brain drain, a rapidly diminishing military, and shrinking cultural influence. It would be a country with 2 choices: rebuild as a humble state proud of its legacy in science, art, music, and literature, or collapse into a failed state haunted by what it once was. It's such a unique part of the world with so much culture, so many fine minds, and so much ingenuity. It could rebuild into a prosperous nation, but it could also all go wrong. But there is another problem: the nukes. Most of Russia's nuclear arsenal, its command and control infrastructure, its military intelligence, and its high-tech capabilities are still based in European Russia. So now you've got a fractured, impoverished, unstable state with enough warheads to end civilization, which is never a good thing. And while the West would demand a disarmament, even a puppet leader wouldn't surrender nukes without unprecedented security and economic guarantees. No country, no matter how corrupt, no matter how broken, just gives up its last bargaining chip. But by this stage, Russia would be a shell of its former self, largely controlled by China and the US. But it will at least survive. The other scenario? Diplomacy fails, and the whole thing ends with a blinding white flash. With tensions rising, what would happen if Moscow decided to push the button? Watch What If Russia Launched a Nuclear Bomb Minute by Minute to see how such a scenario might unfold. Or click on this video instead.